Welcome, everybody. It's good to be with everybody again today. There's some news in the chat that I have not had a chance to confirm. First, I'm Deborah Tomlinson with Inside the Vatican Pilgrimages and with the Urbi et Orbi Foundation. We thank all of those who led the rosary for us today, and as we remembered the soul of Bob's mother who passed away 2 years ago, and for all of your prayer intentions as well. Richard Core, our friend and fellow pilgrim, wrote in the chat that Carlo Acutis's body, that as we learned yesterday for those who were with us, is being beatified on Saturday. This morning in Assisi, the Bishop Sorrentino, opened, the coffin was opened and his body is incorrupt. Now, yesterday I asked the bishop about this because I read that that was the case when they first exhumed the body, and he said that was not true. So this is news, and so it's just something for us to all perhaps look at into ourselves to see if we can find out if this is true. I trust Richard. Also, I think it gives us great hope. Just great hope in these times of sometimes despair. So that's great news today. If that is the case, thank you, Richard. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Jan Bentz, who will be leading us on this very remarkable pilgrimage through Rome, where we will go into, I think, 4 churches in the Villa Borghese Gallery, where we will view and learn about Caravaggio's paintings. So we are honored to have with us, leading us as we walk about 4 miles around Rome to these places, Dr. Jan Bentz. Dr. Jan, are you on with us?
Yes, I am here. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Bob, for having me, and thank you for the rosary, obviously, which is always the most beautiful way to start a tour, really. And thank you for everyone, obviously, who's listening, who's tuning in. I am starting to recognize some of the names and some of the faces, so it's actually kind of nice. So I was like, I know you, and I know you, I know you. So this is really good, and I really like that. So when we're going through some of the topics that we could tour in Rome, I figured, well, why not focus, at least one time on like one specific artist, right? Because usually you visit a church and then you have always a plethora of artists and of artwork and of architecture and all of that. But I think maybe worthwhile to maybe focus in on one. And so I picked one that I particularly like. I'm not going to lie. But I also think has a lot to say, and is also one that you may not be so familiar with, okay? Because we couldn't do this about Michelangelo, and we can still in the future, potentially. But we already talked a little bit about Michelangelo. We can do this about Raphael as well. These are the big names, but I figured that I'll pick one of the lesser known and yet famous ones, which is Michelangelo Caravaggio. Now, what we see here, Deborah has very kindly put up the map, is before we go into the streets, then we can actually see what we're going to visit. And you can do this walking, and that's why I picked these churches. Safety Villa Borghese, maybe, would that be a very long walk, but it's possible. And so we're going to see a couple of churches, but focusing really on the Caravaggio paintings within them. And this is something cool about Rome, is that you can just go into a church and there will be a first world-class painter on the wall, okay? There's no glass. There's no safety distance, okay? It's just there, and it just hangs there. And you just go, and you're like, well, okay, we're going to pop in here, we're going to look at a Caravaggio. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So the first church that we're going to start with is the Church of St. Louis of the French, which is the national French church. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. Every country has their national church in Rome. We're going to go further to the Church of St.
Dr. Bentz, could we just, for 20 seconds, let's look at Rome and notice there's on the right side of the screen, the right side of the Tiber River is all of old Rome. Inside that orange line, that's the old city of Rome. And all of these churches are inside that part. Across the river, you see that line around Vatican City. So that's why they called Vatican City across the Tiber, or Ultra Tevere. And then underneath Vatican City is that big green part, and there's the Pontifical North American College there on the hill. That's where all the American seminarians live and study in Rome. Although I just heard that there usually are 265 there, and there's about 155 this year. So they're down 100. I don't know quite what that means. So Vatican City over there, that's the whole of Vatican City State, inside that sort of blue-black line. Then you cross the Tiber and you come to the old city of Rome, inside those orange walls, which are the old walls of Rome. And the Church of St. Louis of the French there is right next to Piazza Navona. And so this is...
You know, Bob, I think we should let people know who've not been to Rome that if we were to walk from St. Peter's Basilica across the Tiber to Piazza Navona, which is an oval piazza, so beautiful. It's just outside the piazza, we'll find our first two churches, the Church of St. Augustine, and then, of course, as Bob and Dr. Bentz said, the Church of St. Louis of the French. That walk is just over a mile. It's not that far. This is in this area right here, it's very concise, it's very condensed, and it's very easy to get around. So we walk a mile there, and we have these two churches that are really 5 minutes apart. Again, if we were to start at the first church and come back all the way around where we're going to finish at Santa Maria and Valencella, which is known as Chiesa Nuova, that's about a 4-mile walk. And it's so far because, as Dr. Bentz pointed out, the Gallery Borghese is really inside the park. It's a good walk back there to get there.
Perfect.
Yeah. So were you going to say anything else, Robert? I interrupted you.
No, I just wanted people and to have a sense, because I always like to position us here in relation to the city of Rome.
Okay.
Very good. So, yep, and then we will kind of slope up. We'll walk north. We go to Santa Maria del Popolo, which is on Via Palazzo del Popolo or Piazza del Popolo, to discover all of the works of art again that Caravaggio and that the city have to offer. So maybe I can say a couple of introductory remarks about this man. He lived from 1571 to 1610. Which already is interesting because he had a relatively short life, considering, right? So he was 49, which is relatively young. He died probably of a lung infection that he got from a bad cold, that he in turn received by jumping out of the window of a palace in Malta, as one does, and swam to the shore of the mainland. So that got him a really bad cold, which turned to bronchitis most likely, and killed him. Now, Michelangelo Caravaggio, and we have to be careful not to mix him up. He's obviously not the Michelangelo, but a Michelangelo. He was a very interesting case because he was born in Milan. Okay, he was born in the Counter-Reformation environment of Cardinal Charles Borromeo, whom he saw personally multiple times, that he attested to, and so he saw his decisions, his charitable works in Milan and so forth. And then he went to Rome, where he started basically as a waiter. Okay, so this is like the American dream of the 16th century, is to go to Rome and to be a famous painter. All right, and so he goes to Rome and he tries to become famous, and for the longest period of time he does not. Okay, he does not become famous, and then his career becomes stellar, and he was considered the best artist of Rome towards the end of his life in 1605. Then he had to leave Rome because of a criminal offense, and then his career and his life deteriorated. Caravaggio is a man who is really his own worst enemy. He is constantly in brawls. He is constantly betting on sport bets or gambling, card games, and so forth. He's constantly in debt. Well, he constantly tries to get his pictures sold. And as I said, he starts as a waiter. Okay, he goes, he paints, he brings one of his still lifes to Rome, he presents it, and no one cares. And so he says, okay, well, I got to pay the rent somehow. So he starts working at a restaurant, and one night, he's sweeping out, and then the boss presents him a dinner, and he eats it, and he says this artichoke is undercooked, and he throws it on the ground. So he loses that job, and he has to look for another job. And so he is this weird vagabond personality, okay? But what's interesting is that he gives us, and he bequeaths to the world, really, an incredible view of God and of human nature. And that's what's so fascinating, is that his personal struggle, his personal life, becomes intertwined with his interpretations of the scenes of the gospel. And so he really unveils a completely new chapter in art history. If you want to compare, he is a Baroque, okay, he's a Baroque painter, meaning that he is in the time of the Counter-Reformation. And again, Counter-Reformation is always a kind of a strange word, because the church didn't have to counter the Reformation. It was Luther that split off the church. So the church was just continuing on what they had been always doing. But obviously they wanted also to appeal to the new mindset, to the Protestant mindset. And so they tried to emphasize, on the one hand, what has already been in the Catholic Church that Luther so dearly wanted. But at the same time, they also tried to figure out, okay, there is stuff that the Protestants don't understand. Okay, some nature and grace problematic, some problematics of the Mass, of the Eucharist, right? How is this possible, and all of that. So most of Baroque art, which is the time of the Counter-Reformation, emphasizes those features. And I'm saying this not just because as a general lecture, but I'm telling you this because we will see all of that just in a brief moment. Now, to go to Caravaggio, really, if you want one word to kind of explain his art, then I think you would have to. You're well off using three words, and that is conversion, vocation, and penitence. All of his paintings really deal with that, and they deal with that because he himself is a man who constantly undergoes conversion. He feels his vocation, he's looking for his vocation, and penitence. Either from the outside, he goes to jail, he is expelled from his work, he doesn't sell paintings, he has to flee Rome, he has to flee Malta, okay? But also understanding penitence in the religious sense, taking on suffering in order to participate in the suffering of Christ. So, those just as kind of introductory remarks, and I think with those introductory remarks we can immediately dive in to the streets of Rome. And the very busy streets of Rome, always lots of traffic, always very loud. It's very hard to speak when you go from church to church, but once we enter the churches, we are really engulfed by that beauty. So what we're looking at is the freshly restored facade of Saint Louis of the French, which is dedicated to the only saintly king of the French kingdom, a very long line of kings, which is Saint Louis the First. So he was a saintly king, and this church is dedicated to him. Now, in this church, which is a very, very beautiful church, and you can already look at this. This was an incredible honor for Caravaggio to paint something in this already magnificent church. Okay, in this church, we find the so-called Kontarelli Chapel. And the Contarelli Chapel is named after a French cardinal. He used to be the cardinal head of this church, and his name was Mathieu Contarel. So translated, Matthew Contarel. And so this cardinal commissions Caravaggio with painting a sequence of St. Matthew. All right. Now, going to that chapel, we pass by one painting, and I want to just point that out very briefly. This is not Caravaggio. Okay, this is not Caravaggio. Can we stick with that for a second? And that is not Caravaggio, that is Domenichino. And I want to show you a contemporary of Caravaggio who was considered the standard of art. Okay, if you were born and lived in the 16th century, so in the 1500s, and you studied and you wanted to become a painter, you wanted to paint like this. This was the non plus ultra. This was the best. Okay, this is going to sell. If you bring something like this to an auction, it will sell in a heartbeat. Okay, no questions asked. So Domenichino, you can see, is typical features of the Raphael school. You have a very clear positioning of everybody. Okay, it's a little bit busy. This particular one's a little bit busy, but it's very clear. You can see everything. You can see every finger. You can see every limb. You can see every face. You have a clear story to be told. This is from the life of Saint Cecilia. Okay, one of the charitable acts that she does. You can see everything. There's no darkness. Everything is light. It looks basically like a neoclassical paradise. Okay, everyone wants to live in the city. It looks nice. Everyone's dressed nice. Everyone looks friendly, and you can see everything. Okay, Caravaggio looked at that and he said, no, that's not going to go. That's not going to fly with me. So entering the Contadelli Chapel, we can see how he chose to do a completely different style in painting. Okay, away with the light, away with the glorious Greek god bodies, away with much of the color, okay, away with the clarity. What he shows us is a dark and grim reality. But in that dark and grim reality, there is always this beacon of light that is the faith and ultimately Jesus Christ himself. So let's discover Jesus Christ's presence in this in the side chapel. Okay, and you can see in the side chapel you have 3 moments of the life of Matthew, and we're going to talk about them in detail in a moment. On the left, the vocation of Matthew. In the center, the inspiration of Matthew, and on the right, the martyrdom of Matthew. So that is the life cycle of Matthew. So let's dive right in, and we can look at the vocation of Matthew. All of these 3 paintings, by the way, were painted between 1599 and 1600. I'll tell you there was a problem with the inspiration of Matthew. I'll tell you that in a second, but all of them were painted in a very relatively short period of time because this was the first commission that Caravaggio got. The Pope actually died, sorry, not the Pope, the Cardinal Kontarelli actually died while Caravaggio was painting this, but he luckily left an endowment for Caravaggio to get paid. Because, and this is again, it's one of those Caravaggio moments that could have led to tragedy real quickly, right? He goes out and gets his first commission, 3 paintings, side chapel, amazing, and then the Cardinal dies, right? It could have been a Caravaggio-esque tragic, but it didn't because luckily the Cardinal left the money in a balance, and so Caravaggio did get paid full amount. But the Cardinal never got to see his chapel. Anyways, all right. So we're
Jan, do we know how much Deborah. He was paid? Do we know about how much he was paid?
Yes. Actually, we have an incredibly good record of the painting and the payment and all of that. Do I know how much he got paid? I do not. I'm sorry. I can find it out for you, but I don't remember.
No. Okay.
But we can find out. Actually, it's and remember, also in the 1600s, it was very common to take notes, take names of who received communion and who went to confession when. So we have a list in this church of Caravaggio going to communion, how often he went to communion. So he went to communion every week. So and that's one of those things is, you can talk about the moral life of the artist, but ultimately, I mean, they did try to live as good, faithful people. Not all of them, but many of them. Vado was one of them. Anyways, good. So yes, I'm sorry, I don't know how much you paid for that. I would have to, I'd have to look that up, but I can find out. Now, what we see is not the vocation of Saint Matthew. What we see is a scene from Caravaggio's contemporary tavern in Rome. If you wanted to get a beer after a hard day's of work, then you would stumble into a pretty dark room that was some pub somewhere in Trastevere, and that would probably look like this. You walk into just a bunch of people sitting around a table talking, and that is what Caravaggio chose to depict. Now, why he chose to depict this, I'm gonna explain, but let's look at what we're actually seeing. We're seeing 2 men that just came in, okay, on the right side. They came in through a door that we don't see. And then you have 5 men sitting around a table. All 5 react differently to the 2 that actually entered. We see a window that is open, but no light comes in. And we have an unknown light source outside of the picture. So that's what we're looking at. The 2 people who came in, if you look closely, you can recognize at least one of them. And he has a very faint halo, is Jesus Christ. right? Jesus Christ stands in the back. You can barely see any of his body. You can barely see his face and his arm and his hand, most importantly. And then you have a person standing in front of him. So these two people are Christ and Peter. And Christ and Peter just took a stroll outside, and they're like, hey, we need more apostles. They kind of barged into a bar, and Jesus points at the guy he wants. Like, that guy, he looks good. I want him. He looks very sane. He looks like he could be sanely mad. And that is obviously St. Matthew. So Jesus Christ points at a person, and he does it with a hand that Caravaggio very attentively copied from the creation story of the Sistine Chapel, right? So this is God's hand creating his follower. God's hand stretched out just like God's hand is stretched out. Now it is Jesus Christ's hand stretched out to point at Matthew. And you have the person reacting, and that person is Matthew. Matthew is sitting in the middle of the table, so you have two young men on his left, and you have an older and a young man on his right, to our left, and Matthew's in the middle, and he points at himself. He points at his own heart, and he points at himself, and he has his eyes open, and they're very surprised, and he says, me? You want me to follow you? You crazy. I'm a tax collector, okay? I'm literally the scum, even by my fellow Israelites. I'm the scum because I'm on the Roman side, right, collecting taxes for this unjust and emperor. So Jesus Christ says, "No, I want you." And I always like to, to call this painting the story of the three hands, okay? Because the three hands that we're seeing is number one, Jesus' hand, number two, Peter's hand, and number three, Matthew's hand. And there you have the complete theology of the Catholic Church, right there. Jesus calls, the Church repeats, and Matthew, the person who is called, answers. And I love that, right? So Jesus points at his hand. He is the creator. He says, I want you. Peter, in a little bit more faint kind of suggestion, copies the hand, right next, juxtaposed, right? Copies his hand gesture, calling, and then you have Matthew answering. Because God can call no one if the person doesn't respond with yes, with a fiat. So this is Matthew's fiat, basically, right? Okay, and what is interesting is the other people around the table, because all of them give an example of what not to do. The two young men on the right, from our perspective is on the right, from Matthew's perspective is on the left, they're dressed like nobles, like Roman nobles, and Caravaggio would have had his fight in his day with one of these. He was constantly in brawls with Roman nobles. He just beat the living daylight out of them. So they're dressed as young nobles, and they're unfazed. They kind of turn around, but they don't really care. They're interested, but there's no reaction. They just treat Jesus as anyone that would just came into the house, into the bar. Okay, what are the other two people doing? And this is what's more interesting. There is a young man, younger than Matthew, sitting down at the table collecting the coins, and he could see Jesus, but he chooses not to. He doesn't look up. He looks to the coins, and he says, no, I'm counting. I'm just 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I'm counting my taxes that I collected today, just making sure that the emperor gets his money, So he's not responding. And then, even more interesting, the older man that is older than Caravaggio, older than Matthew, he kind of sets his glasses straight, right? And he could look up. And he kind of does. He sets glasses, but then he chooses to look down, and he says, "Look, Jesus, I'm the one that spent his whole life earning my place at this table. I'm not going to leave it for some crazy, crazy person that calls himself the Messiah. Only Matthew gets struck, and Matthew gets struck twice. Jesus hits him hard. Jesus hits him in the face, and Jesus hits him in the heart." He hits him in the face, which is represented by the supernatural light. Okay, so there's a light beam coming in behind Jesus, and it hits Matthew literally in the face. That's his eyes. That's his reason. He says, wow, I'm seeing God. I see God. My reason understands what is happening. And he says with his heart, with his rational faculties represented by his fingers, he points at his heart and he says, and I understand what you want from me. And so in the next moment, Matthew will get up, which you can see underneath the table. You can see the two legs of Matthew, which are not at rest, but they're kind of spread out in a kind of angled fashion, which means that he is about to kind of slip off his chair, kick his chair away, get up, and follow Jesus. And so here we have the beautiful moment of the calling of St. Matthew. And you have the whole church theology of faith and reason already present. You have the church present, and you have the whole idea of the heart, right? St. Augustine's idea of the heart present. So why does Jesus call Matthew? Well, because he needs him to be an evangelist. So we can continue to look at the next painting. But maybe there are some questions right now. I have to open the chat to see if there are questions.
Dr. Bentz.
Yes, Bob. Yes.
Could we go back to the calling of St. Matthew? Now, we could wait till the end of your presentation, but since we're live and a question has emerged in my heart, I'm going to ask. You know that there's a controversy about this painting. And yes. I'm going to explain that I too have written about this because, but the daughter of Sandro Magister, who's quite a famous Vaticanist, is an art historian, and another art historian, Liz Lev, who is the daughter of Marianne Glendon, the former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, has had a dispute with the daughter of Sandro Magister over, is it possible that Matthew is the young man with his head bent down? And is it possible that the man that we think is Matthew with the beard and his finger is pointing at the young man? And that thesis has been argued by the daughter of Sandro Magister, Professor Magister, the art historian. And Liz Lev, very famously, has denounced that theory as ridiculous. However, I am tempted by the theory because there is a bit of light on the young man's face. The light is touching his nose. His hands, which are dealing with the money, are being touched by the light, and his hand will become the hands that create the Gospel of St. Matthew. So I don't know the answer to that question, and the preponderance, I suppose 80 or 90 or more % of art historians would say that the man with the beard is pointing to himself, to his own heart, as you beautifully interpret. I really appreciate. I love this painting, and I loved your interpretation. It's fantastic, in fact, better than I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. And yet, I wanted to interject this note of dispute or polemic or controversy, just to make it more interesting.
I completely agree with you, and you opened a big can of worms because, unlike you said, the majority of people would actually say that Matthew is not even depicted here. Mostly secular art historians, this is the common, if you study art history in Germany, you'll learn that Matthew's not in this picture. So we have to deal with a bunch of things here. The two strongest arguments that I bring up, and again, there's really no way of knowing other than expecting Michelangelo to be actually painting Matthew when Matthew's supposed to be depicted, is the hands. And I think that the hands are the mirroring is much clearer from Jesus, church, and the hand pointing to the heart, and it's not pointing at someone else. Because why would there be another intermittent? So the person who says this does not understand Catholic vocational theology, because why would there be an intermittent person pointing at the young man? That's argument number one. So because he cannot answer for someone else, he can only answer for himself. But then why is the hand literally the center of the table? Because it is when you look at the composition, the hand is exactly in the center. Why, if it's just another step down from Jesus, Peter, to a fourth person that doesn't even know what's going on? That's my first argument. The second argument is that the light that comes in, the supernatural light, if you draw a line, okay, if you actually take a pencil and you drew a line from that beam, it would hit exactly in Matthew's face. And I think that is, while I hear what you're saying, and it is a very interesting point, and I'm listening to what you're saying, that the light now touches on the hands of the young man counting, okay, it is much straighter into Matthew's, the old man's face. And what is interesting is that Caravaggio oftentimes, and we'll see this in the third painting here, paints multiple times achronologically as contemporary. So before, while, and after, or before, during, and after, Caravaggio likes to paint at the same time. So I'm not saying that the young man could not be Matthew, but I would argue that that is Matthew before he was called. And the old man pointing at himself, or the older man pointing at himself, is Matthew in the moment of being called, which is more central to this painting. And I'll make this point again when we look at the Martyrdom, where we have the same thing. We see 3 stages, but at the same time, which is very Baroque, because it emphasized the eternity. But thank you for bringing it up. It is a big controversy, and I always joke about with my students, I always joke where it was like, so where do you think Matthew is? And then they all give me things like, well, if you were, studying art history in Germany, then there would be no Matthew. So we can just move on.
Okay.
Anyways, okay, so we have the... Go ahead, Bob.
One other thing, Pope Francis used to stay next door to St. Louis of the French. So about 20 steps from this church and from this painting. And he has told us that he used to visit. He would stand here. And looking at this painting, he says Jesus is having mercy on Matthew and calling him away from his life of money collecting to become an apostle and the writer of the gospel. So he's having mercy and calling, or choosing, and it's miserando is having mercy, et eligendo is choosing or selecting or calling. That became the episcopal motto of Pope Francis, and he chose it looking at this painting. So this was his favorite. This is the favorite painting of Pope Francis and the painting that gave him his episcopal motto.
Very nice. Thank you. Good. And so we move on to the inspiration of Matthew. And so now we have again, even older men doing what he was called to do, writing the gospel. And so again, Caravaggio picks a composition that reflects a theological theme. It is not Matthew who writes the gospel. It is the Holy Spirit who writes the gospel. Matthew is inspired. And so what we see here, all of what we see in this painting tells us that story. Number one, we have the angel as the mediator between God and man. So kind of a physical representation, because it's hard to paint the Holy Spirit, right? Let's be honest, it's hard to paint the Holy Spirit. So you have the angel as an intermediate, and he counts on his fingers in a Socratic fashion, which is something that Caravaggio took from Raphael, the things to write down, right? So Matthew, don't forget this, and Matthew, don't forget that, and Matthew, don't forget this. And so Matthew is listening. Matthew, and I love this, Matthew looks like he just came in from going shopping in the morning, okay? And he totally forgot to write the gospel. So like he stormed in, he doesn't even sit down. He leans on the little stool and he quickly gets his pen out and he starts writing, which also shows the unsettledness, right? The internal unsettledness, because he's such in a hurry to write everything down that he can barely keep up. And what is another indication of that internal hurry is the colors of Matthew's robe. The colors of Matthew's robe are yellow and orange and red. What are those colors? The colors of fire. This is the Holy Spirit setting Matthew's heart ablaze to write the gospel. And that is what that inspiration is all about, right? As we know. So Matthew writes it down quickly. He has his halo, as we can see, and he is leaning on that stool. There's a very beautiful, almost playful Baroque moment, which is that the stool is not actually completely stable. And so you can see it's very hard. It's very dark. So Caravaggio, put a little bit more light in your paintings, please. But I can tell you that the front side of the stool actually dangles over that little wooden beam that it is resting on, the floor, presumably, that it's resting on. So it's not completely stable. And there are two things I think that are interesting about this. Number one, it's a very Baroque moment. It's a moment where... Sorry, yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Jan. Okay, sorry. The first element of that is that it's a very Baroque moment where the viewer is participating in the painting, right? I am here, and this stool anytime can tip over and fall into my world. Okay, so that's this very Baroque idea, art historically speaking. But theologically, it's very interesting because it shows that there is some kind of shakiness, imbalance, right? There is a fragility whenever man's mind works together with God's plan. And I think this is true, obviously, for the Gospels, but also for everyday life. And Caravaggio would have recognized that, praying and trying and failing and getting up again and trying again and failing. It's shaky. It's a shaky relationship. So that stool could mean a lot here. Now, Caravaggio, this was not the first painting that he actually painted as inspiration, because if we go further, we can see, and this is not obviously on display. In fact, the original was destroyed during the Second World War. It was kept in Dresden and it was just incinerated with the very, very horrific bombing of Dresden. But when Caravaggio put it up, the archpriest of the then church, St. Louis, he said, "We cannot have this up here. We can't have this up." And Caravaggio said, "Why not?" So can we switch to the black and white, please? He says, "Why not?" He says, "Well, because we have a theological problem. In this inspiration, in this version of the inspiration, the angel actually touches Matthew, which means that Matthew is not writing it. It's the angel that is writing it, right? And it's a very beautiful, it's a very almost cute, right, relation of Matthew and that angel. That angel just kind of leaning over as if it meant nothing to, write down the word of God. And Matthew is still really anxious. He looks at it with wide open eyes. He looks at the text. He's like, "Oh, I can't even believe what I'm writing myself." But the angel touches the hand. And so Cardinal Contadelli said, "Okay, so we can't have that. This is not Matthew writing. This is the angel writing." So Caravaggio went back and he said, "Okay," and so that's why you have that very strong and very clear separation of the angel and Matthew and what we have today, rather than what the original was like. This is the original, which we have a black and white photo of. This is what we got, but the original, which was obviously in color, was destroyed during the war. And so we come finally to the end of Matthew's life. Now, in order to figure out the end of Matthew's life, we have to go to the Golden Legend, because I don't think that the Gospel tells us anything about it. And the Golden Legend tells us that Matthew went to the east, okay, presumably to the Empire of Persia, and or Ethiopia potentially, and he started preaching. Okay, he started preaching for the emperor, and he started proclaiming the good news. And so in this moment here, we see the Martyrdom Proper. And this martyrdom happened after Matthew had called the emperor to, stick with his wife and not with his dozens of mistresses. And he was celebrating Mass one day. And so his assassin fundamentally came in and he dragged him off the altar and he stabbed him. So what do we see? Again, let's start with what we see. We see an angel on a cloud. We see Matthew laying down in liturgical vestments. We see his assassin, his murderer, standing above him with a sword in hand. We have 3 naked men fleeing the scene. One is actually an altar boy, and then you have 3 in the front that are kind of turning away. And then on the left, we have this weird conglomeration of people that look like Roman nobles again. That's what we've seen. Let me point out some details, and this is actually a very interesting picture because Caravaggio painted this over and over and over again, but he left the original charcoal drawings. So when you actually X-ray this, you have even more people in this painting. But this is what he finally wanted to bequeath to the world. So this is what we're going to look at. Now we're looking at in the background. There's an altar. Many people don't realize that there's an altar. There's a cross. That's the Enterpentium Cross, and then you have a candle. You have a book open. So that is Matthew's altar to celebrate Mass. You have 3 steps up to that Mass. Very classical Roman Catholic altar. And then you have Matthew that is on the ground, but then Matthew reaches down into darkness, and there's like a weird hole in the ground. And you ask yourself, why is there a hole in the church? This doesn't look safe. Okay, I'm sorry, it doesn't look safe. You're going to get the congregation there. People are going to fall in the pit. So what is that hole all about? Right? Well, you see that hole, great, and then you see again these 2 young gentlemen with the feathers on their hats that you saw in the calling of Matthew. So they encounter us again. So let's start with them because they're the easiest to explain. those are obviously, again, the two nobles from the first painting, and they look at Matthew and they say, we didn't care when he was called. We don't care that he dies. Whatever. We'll go on. We'll live in our palaces. All good. Right? So they're not really participating. Then you have Matthew, that was just dragged from his altar in his in his chasuble, and is being killed. So he's being stabbed once. He's already bleeding. It's hard to see because it's very dark. So I'm sorry. It's not my fault. It's Caravaggio's fault. Not my fault. It's Caravaggio painted everything so dark. But he's bleeding, and so he's in the moment of martyrdom. And so with the one hand that actually looks like the murderer tries to grasp, he's actually reaching up to clasp the palm branch of the angel in heaven. So the angel in heaven leaning on the cloud, very Raphael, leaning on the cloud brings the palm of martyrdom to Matthew. Basically a sign, buddy, you gonna walk into heaven, pearl and gates open. Okay, there's just no question about that. So he knows he will go to heaven. What is Matthew reaching into? Why is there a gigantic hole in the ground? Mm-hmm. So when you study this, and there's a German art historian who's a priest, actually, who studied this a little bit more in detail, and he said the weird shape of that hole reminds him of a baptistry in Bethesda in the Holy Land. And Matthew, actually, right now, with his last dying breath, is still baptizing, so doing his job as a called one of Christ, baptizing the pagans. And who is being baptized? They obviously get baptized by immersion, so they have to take their clothes off. The naked guys, right? The naked people, they just have like a loincloth on. They get baptized. That's why they're naked. Why are there a bunch of naked people in here? Because they get baptized, right? They're going to step into that pool of Bethesda to get baptized. And this is the key, the murderer is also naked. Like Judas, the person who betrays Christ, this man betrays Matthew, is the very same person who wanted to join him in the first place. One of the chosen ones is going to be the one that betrays the cause. So Matthew gets killed by him, and then you have that altar boy. That altar boy is very famous, running away in like horror and anguish, running outside into the background darkness. So these are the three times that I was talking about. We have Mass before what is going on. We have the assassination of Matthew, the murder, the martyrdom, what is going on right now. And we have a vision of the future, Matthew in heaven. 3 time periods all in one, okay? I remind everyone that these were people that did not have television, okay? Moving pictures, not a thing. This is a moving picture of the Baroque. It is multiple times painted at the same time contemporaneously, so you get to see something moving without anything moving. Good. So with that, I think we can close the Contadelli Chapel. It's already a lot that I said here, but it is a very rich chapel. So I figured that it's worthwhile spending time here. Now, does anyone have another question? Bob, do you have a question? I'm going to check the chat if there are any other questions. There is one question, which is, he painted the exact same face as the last painting depicting Matthew. Maybe the angel knew he was in a bar. Okay, I don't understand that question, but yes, obviously the face of Matthew is the same in all 3 to show the continuity. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. We do have to go back. One more step. We got to go back into the church. One second. Caravaggio. Nope, one further. Caravaggio doesn't say to the onlooker, this is some story of some guy from the past. He says, I was there. I saw it. You are here. You're seeing it. You're experiencing it. To emphasize that, Caravaggio paints himself in a self-portrait in this picture. And you can see him, here's the face. So if you look at the assassin, okay, you look at the shoulder of the assassin, go a little bit to the left. There's a man in the background standing, looking towards the foreground. That is Caravaggio himself. A self-portrait. he is 29. Okay. Also, you can see the face is very old already. So this is a man that has been experienced a lot of hardship. He's 29, and he is witnessing it, and he is inviting all of us to witness this as if it were happening today, because it is happening today. There's still people dying for their faith, dying for our faith, being martyred. So I think that's an important feature. All right, so we're going to leave the Contarelli Chapel and we're going to move into a church adjacent. We have to walk about 5 minutes only. It's very short. It's very short way. And we go to the church of Saint Augustine. Among other things, the mother of Saint Augustine is buried here. Saint Monica, so she has her own chapel, but again, we're focusing on our artist friends. So we're going to go into the first side chapel on the left, which is the so-called Madonna of the Pilgrims. Okay, and so it's a side chapel of the Madonna of the Pilgrims. It's the Pilgrims side chapel, and what better side chapel to visit on a pilgrimage than the Pilgrims side chapel, right? So let's go a little bit closer and let's look at what we see. So Caravaggio was very aware that many people came to Rome, and so many people obviously visited the Church of St. Augustine. So he chose to depict, again, a scene from everyday life, not a scene that is idealized like Domenichino, not a scene where everyone looks like Greek gods. People don't look like Greek gods, okay? And they don't. Not everyone goes to the gym 6 hours a day. We don't have time for that, okay? And we don't want to. People are dirty. People are rugged. People are ugly. They have wrinkles. They have hair loss. They have dirty feet. They have dirty hands. They have dirt underneath their fingernails. That's just what reality's like. And so he shows us two pilgrims that look exactly like that. Okay. And the closest thing actually to the altar underneath are the dirty feet of the pilgrims. And he's showing us this couple that has just come a long way and visits the Virgin Mother. And how beautiful is that? First of all, you can see that the pilgrim, you can recognize the pilgrims by the staff and by the cloak. Okay, today maybe also you'd say the seashell because of Santiago de Compostela. Naturally, whenever you see a seashell, that's obviously a sign of pilgrimage. But here, he wasn't aware of that yet. So he depicts him with a staff and dirty feet, and that's really the third element of a pilgrimage: the staff, the cloak, and dirty feet, because these people have walked a lot to go where they went. Now he's showing them not arriving in a church or looking at a picture, but at the Virgin Mary herself. Right, which says a lot about art and pilgrimages when you think about it. So they're looking at the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary is standing, kind of leaning on the wall, which is the door frame of the house of Loreto, which is the house that Jesus grew up in. Right. So this is his house, basically, his childhood home. And then you see Jesus as kind of a smaller boy. But his mother still holds him like he's a toddler. And that's really the one thing that is kind of strange about this. And it's hard to say if it's the incapacity of Caravaggio to actually get everything anatomically right about the human body, or if it's a choice that he made. But the baby is actually way too heavy to be held like that. Okay, the Virgin Mary is leaning, so her center of gravity is shifted to the right, and she's also leaning over towards the pilgrims. And so the baby is leaning back and is actually kind of fat and pretty big too. So holding Jesus like that would be extremely uncomfortable, borderline not possible by a relatively fragile woman that we see here. So this shows us we're not just looking at a baby. We are looking at something supernatural. There is something going on here that we cannot fully wrap our minds around. So that's the thing. And then one thing that I always love to point out is that we only really see one face. We see the face of the Virgin Mary. But the three faces, so the two pilgrim faces, plus the face of Jesus, we don't really see. The pilgrims, because they're facing away from us, because they don't care about us. We are just behind them. We are following in their footsteps. Okay, they're the ones going, blazing the trail. But we also don't really see the face of Jesus, because you have to be a pilgrim to see the face of Jesus. And you can see in their reaction, and you can see in their positioning that they would be able to see the face of Jesus. But in order to see the face of Jesus, you better get down on your knees. right? So that's that again. It's a very rough kind of way of approaching the subject. There's nothing, cheesy or tacky or about it that sometimes you could say Raphael did, where everything just looks like it's a perfect, idealized world. This is real. This could be a photograph, for all that matters, in the 16th century, right? So you have a scene from reality, and every pilgrim that went into this church says, hey, there's someone that looks like me. There is someone that has dirty feet. My feet are dirty. I have, splinters and cuts and blisters. Yeah, that guy looks like me. He just walked a long ways. His bottoms are dirty. He has a staff. I have a staff. He has a beard. He hasn't shaved in a while, right? So there is this identification. And this is what Caravaggio really brings on the table in Baroque art. He brings on the table a realism that may be a little bit overemphasized in the sense that it is too extreme in what it tries to do, but it is really, it's realistic. He uses models that are his contemporaries. He uses people that don't look like models, right? They look like just normal people. He uses fishmongers to pay the as models for his apostles. He uses tax collectors probably to paint Matthew. And he says, we need this realism because otherwise people will just walk by these paintings and they think, oh, this is a story from a long time ago. It doesn't concern me anymore. But this is the reality of Caravaggio's street life. People would have seen, contemporaries of his would have seen people like that walking on the street. And that's why he chose to do that. There's a very famous story, and I think it's an urban legend, a Roman urban legend. But there's a very famous story where Caravaggio went out to the street to pick his model for Jesus at the for one of his paintings. And so there's just a man walking by, a young man, but and he just pointed at me. He's like, "Hey, do you have time? I'll pay you to sit as a model for me, for Jesus Christ." And the man says, "Sure, some extra bucks can't hurt." So he sits down and he gets model. And then, years after, Caravaggio does the same thing. He wants to paint Judas, and he goes out and to the street and he's looking for a good Judas. And then there's an older, kind of rough-looking man coming by, and he says, "That's a perfect Judas." So he points at him and says, "Hey, you!" And the man starts crying. And he comes to him and he says, "Yeah, what do you want?" And Caravaggio says, I want to paint you as Judas. Can you sit model?" And the man says, he started crying and he says, "I'm the man that you picked years ago to be your Jesus. But now my life has just become so rotten that now you take me as a Judas." So again, I think it's an urban legend, but it's I think it gets the story across. Okay, so this is really the only painting that we have of Caravaggio in this church. So while it's a beautiful place, I think we can move on and we can visit the next church, which we have to walk up part of the Via del Corso. Okay, and we get to a big square that's always full of people, like you see here, which is Piazza del Popolo. It's the most furthest northern square in Rome, and so we have a church that is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and to mark its location, it's called Santa Maria del Popolo. So Saint Mary of the People, named after the square, which is called the Square of the People. So let's pop inside and let's look at another chapel. And this chapel was done in 1601. So it's right after he finished the painting of the Matthew, and after people saw Matthew, they just went crazy. They went nuts. They would flock to St. Louis and they would say, "This is the guy. This is the man. This is the new Michelangelo. This is it. We found him. We found the best painter of our time." And so all of the cardinals started looking like, okay, what is that all about? And started approaching Caravaggio. It's like, "Hey, do you have time to paint me that? Or you have time to paint me that?" And so the commissions finally came in and Caravaggio said, my luck has turned. My misfortune has turned, and now I get all of the commissions. So the person who commissioned him is Cardinal Cerasi, Tiberius Cerasi. That was still good times when people were actually named Tiberius Cerasi. And so he wants Caravaggio to paint the conversion of Paul. Okay, the conversion of Paul. And so Caravaggio actually paints multiple conversions of Paul. I'm going to show you two, but for 1 second, let's stay here. The one that gets finally picked, we see on our right. But Caravaggio, because he is sneaky and he knows his cardinal clientele, he says, wait a second, you cannot just paint St. Paul. If you have St. Paul, you also need St. Peter. This is something that I've mentioned on a previous tour. And this you may recall that. So whenever there's Peter, there's Paul. Whenever there's Paul, there's Peter. So he got commissioned for Paul, and he actually convinced Cardinal Cherasi to also have the Peter. And so the Cardinal said, yes, sure, fine. Okay, you got me there. But maybe as a little bit as a payback, he let him paint in the side chapel, which already had a painting in it. And that painting you can see is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. So you can see that in the center, which is painted by basically the one artist that Caravaggio hates and detests, and that is Carraggi, Annibale Carraggi, who Caravaggio thinks this is literally the epitome of tacky, cheesy art that no one wants to look at anymore. And you can see the contrast quite starkly, right? Annibale Carraggi, again, light, lots of colors, very beautiful. Whereas Caravaggio's paintings left and right are like dark and grim. So nonetheless, obviously, he takes a commission. He finally can pay his rent, and he wants to keep that. So he paints the Conversion of St. Paul on the right and the Martyrdom of St. Peter on the left. So let's look at those in detail. Now, there is one question that came in by Ingrid. She said, the question is the masterful use of the chiaroscuro that is used to create the drama and realism. So is that the reason why the realism is so impressive? And yes, I would say so. So you can say multiple things about this. First of all, what is a chiaroscuro? Chiaroscuro is that there's a very strong contrast between dark and light. And whenever we see Caravaggio, what should strike you is that the background is always very dark. The people in the front are very light. And he plays with that contrast. Okay, sometimes it's even called tenebrism, which means kind of the shadowy painting or the shadow painter. I think to answer Ingrid's question, yes, I think the chiaroscuro certainly gives it a very rugged, very realistic viewpoint. But I think there's actually a more important reason why he used the chiaroscuro. So I will talk about it, but not quite now. I will talk about it when we speak about the last painting, which is the Entombment of Christ. So let's go to Peter. But thank you, Ingrid, for that question. The martyrdom of Peter, we all know Peter was crucified. He said, I don't deserve to be crucified like my master, so I want to be crucified upside down. So the Romans said, okay, we can work with this, put him upside down and nail him to the cross in the circus of Nero, which is where today St. Peter's Basilica rests. We've spoken about that at the tour of St. Peter's Basilica. Now, if you want to have an alternative title for this, I could call this, and this is from Liz Left, since we already mentioned her name today, 4 Men at Work. And it's 3 men at work and 1 man working in the opposite direction. Caravaggio, as we've already established, chooses to pick people from his own time with their own clothing. These are not historically correct clothing for the time of Peter. The only one who is actually correctly clothed is Peter himself, but the other ones are contemporaries of Caravaggio, and so they all set up that cross. And I think the most impressive element of this painting is just the quotidianness of it. This is a guy who was they had 4 nails, huge nails, driven through his hands and feet. He is about to die. So he knows he is going to die. This is the end of his life. He will suffer, he will suffocate, he will bleed out. Okay? And look at his face. It's just, okay, this is just another thing on the checklist. It's just, okay, the next thing that's coming. So there are 3 men working to get this guy to die. And then there's 1 man really, really working towards accepting that death. and he is clasping the nail. He doesn't look at the nail and says, wow, he doesn't cry, there's no tear. But he looks at the nail and he tries to clasp it, to even suffer more for Christ, right? To really go into the footsteps of his master and to really accept that horrible fate that he is suffering. And it's really all about that. It's all about this face. And most of the painting really serves that face. The whole composition, right? Everything is very much on the left, whereas the raised head is towards the right, right? And it's surrounded by darkness, making the contrast even stronger, right? The colors don't really matter much. The positioning of the three men that are working in one direction don't really matter much. But what matters is Peter's acceptance of this horrible death. So I think that it's a very incredible participation. It allows us to incredibly participate in this poor man's fate. So now, a little bit of a more positive note, we have the conversion of St. Paul. So moving on, we can see Paul in the moment of being converted. And here we see him. This is, again, Michelangelo, like with Matthew, this is a second edition of this painting. So we have another edition of St. Matthew. But we see, of St. Paul, I keep saying Matthew now, of St. Paul. And we see Paul in one of the most important moments of his life, which is his conversion. Really amazing and somewhat inexplicable, and maybe Bob, you have an insight into this, is most of the painting is taken up by the horse. You kind of have to look for Paul, right? You kind of have to, that's a horse bottom, there's a horse mane, there's a horse face, there's an old man, there's Paul, oh, he's on the ground, all right, okay. So there's Paul on the ground, stretching, very young man, stretching, he looks like a Roman soldier, stretching out his arms, right? Being hit by the light. Again, the light source is outside of the painting, so we do not see the sun, we do not see a bright light coming through a cloud or something like that. We just see the effect of the cloud. Returning back to Catholic theology, you don't see God acting, you see God in his effects, right? Remember, all of creation is God's effect. We don't see God, planting seeds. That has already been done. He's created everything. We just see him in his effect, and we reason, there is a tree, so there's a seed, so there's an earth. Where's yours come from? It has come from a beginning, and we arrive at God. In the same way, we see here we don't see God, but we see the effect of God. We see the conversion of Paul. And do we see his conversion? Well, we kind of see a very painful moment of Paul, right? Just having hit the ground from a horse, and it's pretty high up, okay? If you ever sat on a horse, that's pretty high. You fall down, and he gets literally hit by the light of the Holy Spirit. Now his sword is already somewhat separated from his armor. It's laying on the ground, right? He has his cloak, his red cloak is covering the ground. And I always like to think of it in a way that it pre-shadows his martyrdom, right? Because the blood that will be spilled when he's beheaded is already prefigured by that red cloak, kind of draping over the stones like liquid, like blood. So, what do we have? We have an old man that cares for the horse. We have the horse, and we have Paul. So we have the horse reminding us that Paul was just riding before. We have the moment of Paul hitting the ground, what's happening, and we have the future, which is the martyrdom. So maybe Caravaggio wants to tell us that when Paul was called, it was not a calling to glory. He was not saying, you're going to be the great guy that going to write all of the letters. You're going to be part of the Bible, man. Like, this is going to be big. You're going to be famous. You're going to be that guy. You're going to be the, missionary of the Gentiles. You're going to have a huge basilica built for you in Rome. You're going to have thousands of churches named in your name. You're going to have religious orders named after you. You're going to have so much. All of that will happen. But the vocation is, will you take up your cross and will you die for me? And that's what hit him hard. And that's why we can see most of the picture is the horse, because he's just fallen down from it. He has fallen down from his high horse. Haha, right? Word play. So he has fallen down. He realized, if I want to follow Christ, I have to be incredibly humble. I have to accept death. I have to accept persecution. I have to accept pain, fundamentally. And then the glory is also there. So there you go. So there's the conversion. Now, Ingrid, there's one feature here about the chiaroscuro that is pretty clear, and so I can point out one of the lacking skills. Caravaggio was extremely bad with foreshortening. Foreshortening is when you have a limb or any body that it points towards the viewer, right? So I'm holding my hand in the camera, like when my hand is held in the camera like this is called foreshortening. So you see the fingers very big because they're closest to you, and the rest of the hand becomes very small. Caravaggio was notoriously bad about this. So many actually of his contemporaries mocked him for it. He said, yeah, you're just doing your dark backgrounds to hide all of the limbs. And it's true. Some of Caravaggio's paintings have a very curious lack of hands in them. So you see all parts of the body, but not the hands, because it's just really, really hard to paint. And so here, we're just kind of looking for the right leg of Paul. It's not there. It just ends with a knee. So it's one of those things. We have to be honest about our great masters, but Caravaggio was not really good with foreshortening. So now we have one question coming in. The Bible says Paul was struck down, nothing about a horse. Was the horse tradition active at that time, or is that an early use of a horse? That's a very good point. I cannot answer that. I don't know. Maybe Bob, you have an insight about this. I would say that Paul was a Roman. So Romans, especially when they traveled, would travel on horse. So and it was a sign of a high ranking, right? So that because no foreigner, so no immigrant or no foreigner of Rome could enter the city on a horseback. Only the nobility could do that. And so I would imagine that this is just an interpretation of Caravaggio bringing it down to the real, like a real Roman soldier would have a horse. And so if you don't have that's my guess. Maybe there is a deeper message to it, even that, but I don't know. Bob, you have an idea?
Well, it's an ancient tradition that he fell off of an animal that he was riding, and it's an ancient tradition that it was a horse. And you've given a good explanation. He also was struck blind. And these are the two themes that you beautifully expressed. As he falls and puts his hand up, the light is filling the picture, but he no longer can see the light. The light has made him blind, and he won't see for some time until he gets to Damascus. This is on the road to Damascus. And he will be seen by the Christians in Damascus as the guy who's coming to persecute them. They don't even they're afraid. And then he will say, no, I was converted on the road. I was struck by a light, and I heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And this is the moment also that his name was changed to Paul, as so many cases in the Bible. But it's a moment, you beautifully expressed, a moment of death. It looks like he's unconscious. He's fallen so high, he could have smashed his head and died. A conversion is a moment of death which you move from your old life to a new life. It's an incredible painting, and I'm amazed.
Good. Well, with that, so I think we can move on to our next location. Now we are very close to. Okay, sorry. Yes, I do have the second. Which is a little bit more clear. So this is a second version of this that was not chosen to be hung up. And here we have the same features. We have the old man, we have the horse, but here the conversion is a little bit clearer, right? So you have Jesus being held by an angel, stretching out his hands, and then you have Saul or Paul falling down, his red cloak kind of spreading onto the ground. So it's the same features, but it's a different take. And again, as with Matthew, you can just see the second story of or the second version of the story he's trying to tell. The elements are the same. It's a different composition. and so it gives you a different impact. I'm not a very big fan, honestly, of the beard of Paul. That's very anachronistic. I find the depiction of Paul in the other one much better, because Roman soldiers, or Romans specifically, would have rarely wear beard because of the emperor. They always try to emulate the emperor, and the emperor didn't wear it because he was a soldier, and soldiers were not allowed to wear it because of the danger in battle. So I prefer the composition in this one. It's a clear message, but the mystery of the other one, I think, is what trumps that for me. But again, it just gives you, as the viewer, a second version. Now, this is not in Rome, but I did include it because it makes sense. There's a second take on the story. All right, so since we're already on Piazza Popolo, we can walk through, have a little garden stroll through the Villa Borghese, where, by the way, we took our wedding pictures with my wife, so that was very special. We always tell a bunch of people to go and leave behind us because they were always like making funny gestures. We're like, okay, we actually need to take wedding pictures. We need to go to the reception. So we have some beautiful pictures of this. I just chose a couple so that you can get a little bit of fresh air before entering the Galleria Borghese. Deborah, I would say that we do another pilgrimage sometime in the Galleria Borghese that we just dedicate to that. Okay, so I'm not going to really say much here. It's one of the most spectacular museums that exist on the planet. But one of the things that the cardinal who built it, Cardinal Scipio Borghese, collected was Caravaggio's, and Scipione Borghese saw the Matthew and he said, yes, I want something by Caravaggio, and so he commissioned him with a painting. And so this is the wall. You can see two Caravaggios. We're going to look at one of them, but let's go to the most famous one that was not commissioned by Cardinal Borghese, but indeed was commissioned for St. Peter's Basilica, and that is the Madonna with Child and St. Anne, and it is oftentimes known in art lexica as the Madonna of the Palla Frinieri. Now, the Palla Frinieri were an arch confraternity of the papal grooms in the Basilica of St. Peter. So after the Basilica of St. Peter, the new basilica was finished, everyone wanted a side chapel naturally, and since they were the arch fraternity, they got first pick. So they got a side chapel. It was the first side chapel on the right, which we visited together, where today the Pietà is, and that painting was commissioned for that side chapel. So the arch fraternity picked the best artists of their time, the one that was most famous, most notorious in Rome, and that was Caravaggio. So he painted this in 1606, towards the end of his life, and he gives us a beautiful moment in the everyday life of Mary. And so what are we seeing is we see three people and a snake. We see an older woman, we see a younger woman, we see a child, a naked child, and we see a snake. The background here is the chiaroscuro idea, so there is just really darkness, which in my humble opinion is also a bunch of wasted space, because you are being hung up in the most important basilica of all times in the heart of Christianity, and you basically just let half of the canvas go, right? So what the heck? so I was like, if I were Caravaggio or if I were one of his friends, I'd be like, dude, no, like you gotta put something else in there. But here may be a good moment to talk about what the chiaroscuro was for, not art historically speaking, because art historically we just look back at these things and we invent these names, but why would Caravaggio choose to have so much background, so much darkness? And so I would say that you would have to imagine going to St. Peter's in 1606. There is a general lack of what? Of light. Everything is dark. If you go to, if you approach an altarpiece of this sort from very far away, and there are just candles around it, you can't see it. Okay, you cannot see it. You can only see it when you go closer. The closer you go, the more you will see of the painting. And what do you see first? You see first all elements of the painting that are bright, that are white, that are accentuated by a bright color. And then slowly the background would mold into figures in your vision. So by approaching this image, you would slowly discover that there's not just darkness, there is something in that darkness. And you would discover and meet these people for the first time. So Caravaggio, to use one word that may be a little bit exaggerated, but gets the point across, is Caravaggio is enabling you to have a vision. Where you think that there is only darkness, God it comes and appears and makes appear his mother, his grandmother, and himself. And that, I think, is really the point of the chiaroscuro, because people couldn't see the background anyways. If you don't have a gazillion candles around it, that's why Domenichino painted everything so bright, because you couldn't see anything otherwise. But Caravaggio uses that. He says, oh, I'm in a dark side chapel. I'll use that. I will make that part of the picture. I will make that part of the picture, and thereby enabling the onlooker to have a supernatural experience. So you're actually having a vision. And that is, I think, the point of the chiaroscuro, maybe in Caravaggio's mind. Now, obviously, historically, you can say much more about it, but I think that that hopefully makes sense. So anyways, what we see here is the three generations, right? So you have St. Anne as an older lady, you have the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. And as you can imagine, this painting was up for exactly one day, and then it was taken down. Why? Because you do not show the Virgin Mary like that. It is fine that you pick your models from the street, Caravaggio, fine. But do not give us a direct view into the cleavage of the Virgin Mary. That is just not okay. Secondly, baby Jesus is naked, but he's not a baby. He's a little boy. Okay? And so that's another thing, is we're all in favor of naked baby Jesuses to make sure that, you know, everything is there and it's a real baby boy, and the Franciscans were very big about this, and I understand that. But once he is 6, 7, 8, like here, you do not show Jesus naked. That is irreverent. So this picture was taken down for impiety, very clearly. And the Archconfraternity said, okay, really? So they paid him, they still paid him, but Caravaggio was removed from the prime spot. Again, I think Caravaggio is just his own worst enemy. He could have chosen so many different things to paint, and he would still be eternalized in St. Peter's. But because of this, because he did not think this through, he was taken down. Now today, this is in the Galleria Borghese, because the Cardinal Borghese is like, yeah, I'm going to buy that. So he bought it and he put it up because he was a maniac about Caravaggio. He loved Caravaggio. All right, so let's look at the next one. It's I'm a little bit behind, so I apologize, but maybe. Yes, Bob, please, go ahead.
Well, I just note the foot of the child is on the foot of Mary, which is on the foot of the snake.
Oh, yes.
And we have many of our fellow pilgrims and who meditate on this relationship, why Mary in the Catholic tradition has such, as the mother of Jesus, and this is an illustration of it. He is pushing her foot down, in a sense. Her power comes from Almighty, from the divine. But she, as a woman, a sinless woman, is enabled to defeat Satan. And this is why the scripture speaks of her as in the beginning and in the end, you know, crushing the head, even though her heart shall be pierced. So that little detail of this painting strikes me so much.
Yes. No, obviously that's very important, and it is ultimately the conquering of sin, right? The conquering of sin, and obviously the Virgin Mary being sinless is the best example of that. So yes, thank you, Bob, for putting that out. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Good. So let's move on. We have another Caravaggio. There's actually 3 more that we can see in this, and then I want to end on the entombment. So I just want to go briefly through these. This is St. Jerome. I actually, as a student, I had a big poster of this in my room. I still have the poster, but it somehow got wrinkled, so I couldn't really hang it up anymore. But so this is St. Jerome. translating the Bible. As you all know, St. Jerome retreated into a cave in Jerusalem, translated the Vulgate, so the Latin Bible, from Greek, Hebrew, and all of the other dialects it is written in, into a comprehensive text. And so we have Caravaggio's take on that. You have the skull on the table. Again, it's a memento mori, right? A commemoration of death, that we'll all die. So there you have the gritty realism again, and you have this just fantastic face of Jerome. It is incredible, and now we can fanboy a little bit. It is incredible how Caravaggio, with few brush strokes, create a face that we know exactly the feeling of Jerome by his expression. Just this surprised, almost like attentive surprisedness. He isn't surprised because he discovered something that he didn't know before. He is not in shock. He is just, I did not see this coming. Okay. And you have the immediate submission of that in his finger, in his pen, right? He's like, okay, how do I render this into Latin, right? But it's an amazing face, and you don't even see the whole face. You only see shades. It's all shades and skin. And you know what he feels like. You have had this experience reading a book before. Okay, it's incredible. So, and there you have also in front of his chest, right? The chest, again, shows Caravaggio's weakness with some detail, right? There is just kind of a blurge of white, yellowish skin. But then you have the hand in extreme detail, and then the wrist is in complete darkness. So you have black and white right next to another, or black and cream right next to one another. On the left, the pages, again, against the dark background, and then the little like piece of cloth that hangs down the table, also white and black, right? So he's playing with all of these shades, emphasizing it. And, the Baroque art lover would have loved this, absolutely loved this. So now, maybe we can move on. And I want to show you an early Caravaggio where he was a little bit more colorful. So there you go. That's the boy with a fruit basket, which is just next to Saint Jerome, right? So they keep switching the order of them, but it's right next to Saint Jerome. So if you go if we're standing now in the Borghese, you can see Jerome right next to it. You can see young boy with a fruit basket. And so here we have an early Caravaggio, 1593. So that's just the beginning of his period in Rome. This is something that he probably painted in order to sell. Very early on, it didn't get sold, but eventually Cardinal Borghese, after Caravaggio's death, kind of hunted down every Caravaggio he could get his hands on, and now we have this incredible collection of Caravaggios in the Borghese Chapel. One thing that I want to point out, and I don't want to be Johnny Raincloud here, is the overripeness of the fruit. And here we can see the Bacchus, which is on the other side of the young boy with the fruit basket. And you have the same thing. Is the fruit in this basket is not underripe, it's not rotten, okay, but it is so perfectly ripe that wait one day and it will not be good anymore. You have the pomegranate kind of splitting open, you have the grapes, kind of glistening in the light, meaning that they're full, they're just extremely full. If you would take one of those grapes in your mouth, it would just explode in your mouth, which push, and you'd have all of the deliciousness of a grape. The apples are shiny, the peaches they're in perfect condition. But if you leave these peaches out one more day, they will not be good anymore. They will be too smushy. They will start to mold. So in the next painting, which is just 1 year after, you have young Bacchus, and there you have all of that sickliness really coming through. Not so much in the fruit. The fruit is still perfectly ripe, but in the skin, right? It's the inner decay. And maybe that is a self-reflection of Caravaggio, of this idea that I'm ready, I'm in my perfect prime, but if I'm not starting to sell paintings right now, it's all going to go down the drain. Maybe it's that, maybe it's not, but maybe it is. So he has that kind of fighting with himself. And again, it will take 7 years till he gets famous. So there's, he will become a waiter, and he'll become notorious as a street fighter in Rome before he actually gets famous. So this was his, maybe the very youthful hope that he would once become famous before he would become overripe and start to rot. So that just maybe as a biographical note. And last but not least, we will make our way back to the center in Rome. So we will. Okay, we have the. Okay, never mind. I added that later on. I forgot. That is next to Bacchus, which is David and Goliath. So David holding up the head of Goliath. I think what is most impressive about this, again, there's lots to say, but I think the central key here is, first of all, the gritty realism. Okay, so Goliath's head is severed off and it is still bleeding, which is really kind of gross. But it's the reluctance of David. This is not a triumphant David. And Caravaggio has another painting, Judith and Holofernes. It's the same thing. Is Judith looks reluctant doing it. And so here you have David that just has slain the giant. So he is the king. I mean, literally and figuratively. He is the winner, right? He got it. Like, he made it. And his face just does not look like he made it. Okay? It looks like someone is mourning another person's death. So I find that very interesting as a pick, right? Composition is okay. He is practicing his foreshortening, but just that reluctance on the face of David, I think, is very telling. It is very telling if you use it as an introspection into Caravaggio's own state of the soul. All right. Now we have one question that was: is the ripeness of the fruit parallel to the physical ripeness of the boy? And does he have to choose his vocation now before he becomes overripe? Yes, I think that comes from Nick. Nick, I think you're spot on. That is exactly it. And it carries with it again this idea that there is a time where it's too late, right? And how horrible would that be? You know, to come to Rome, to be one of the greatest painters, but then to miss the chance and to have to take the train back and to say, guys, I didn't make it, right? So very good point. All right, our last moment here brings us back to the Chiesa Nuova Santa Maria in Vallicella with a beautiful Borromini front. Next to it is the Oratory of Rome, also the front also built by Borromini. And so in this chapel, the Oratorians founded by Philip Neri, this is Philip Neri's church in Rome, Philip Neri commissioned a painting by Caravaggio. And so the painting that it is the Entombment. Now, for those of you who will join me in the Vatican tour in the next couple of weeks, we will speak about this because the original is actually in the Vatican nowadays, whereas there is a mosaic copy in this church, but this is the church that it was originally painted for. So I think it is worthwhile speaking about it, and I think it's a worthwhile painting to end our tour on. And so we have the Entombment of Christ. So we have Christ, we see a figure that is naked, laying down, held up by two men, John the Evangelist and Nicodemus, right? Whose face, by the way, is Caravaggio. This is painted in 1604, so Caravaggio is what, 43? That guy looks like he is 70-year-old, right? But that's a self-portrait of Caravaggio with 73. Then you have the Virgin Mary, you have Mary of Magdala, and you have Mary of Clopas, okay, Clopas. So the three women, you have two men, three women. Now, Christ was crucified, he is taken down, and he is being put in the tomb. This is an altarpiece, so the tomb is, I guess, underneath the big stone slab, okay? And I'll talk about this in a second. We see the reaction of especially the three women. And what I particularly love is two details. Number one is the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is very old, completely different from Michelangelo's Pietà. It's an old mother. Okay, it's an old Virgin Mary. She's wearing blue, but it's an old mother. But where are her hands? Right? One of the hands is very easy to spot. That's the one that is just above Jesus' face. I hope you can all see that. Right? Where is her other hand? Her other hand is on the other side of the painting in darkness, over Jesus' feet. You see that? Mary is standing there, stretched out. One hand stretching to the face of Jesus, one hand stretched to the feet of Jesus. Mary is holding her son. And that idea he got naturally from Michelangelo, from Michelangelo's Pietà. But she is there. She's holding him. Even though she doesn't look like it, she's the one holding him. Right? Her hands are there. Her hands are the framework of Jesus' body. She has him encapsulated in with her hands, with her arms. The men are just there to hold him up, but Mary embraces him. One more detail is the two women, Mary of Magdala and Mary of Clophas, actually seem to be the same woman. And it's very striking because they wear almost the same thing. They have almost the same facial features. But it's striking that he shows the two types of suffering. The mournful, loud, and very sentimental crying to heaven. And the very meditative, internal, not external, but internal suffering of the heart. So you have the external and the internal, the crying to heaven and the, having the pierced heart in these two women figures. And he kind of puts them, again, if you look for their feet, if you look for their body, it's just, they're not there because Caravaggio doesn't care. He has a dark background, so he doesn't have to paint it, so it's fine. He just leaves it out, right? It's sneaky. But that's okay. They're standing there and they're giving you that impression. But now let's think about one thing here. And this is really, I think, the most important insight. We've already talked about the chiaroscuro. We've already talked about his realism. I don't have to explain that anymore. Where is Jesus put? Is Jesus put in the darkness underneath? It doesn't look like that. It honestly looks like Jesus is being put on the marble slab. What is the marble slab closest to this painting? The Mensa of the altar. The top of the altar. This is, like Michelangelo's Pietà, a painting about the institution of the Eucharist. It is Christ being lowered not into darkness, and there's no hewn tomb. There's no stone that is being rolled back and forth. It's not the entombment. It's not what we've seen thousands of times in art. It's not this dark cave where Jesus being put on a stretcher and then being carried inside. These are men putting him on the stone because you are, as a pilgrim, present for Mass, and your Jesus is right there on that Mensa of the altar, on the altar. So just like these people left Jesus, you found him.